Karen Whitmore stood in her driveway at 6:47 a.m. on a sweltering July morning, holding a measuring tape and clipboard, when the snow machine roared to life next door. Artificial snowflakes began cascading across the Hendersons' front yard like a winter wonderland had exploded in the middle of suburban Phoenix. What in the holy hell? Karen's clipboard clattered to the asphalt as she watched her perfectly manicured neighborhood transform into something resembling a Christmas card. Fever dream. The snow machine, industrial grade and loud enough to wake the entire Willowbrook Estates subdivision, continued its relentless assault on summer itself. For 3 years, Karen had served as president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, with the iron grip of someone who measured grass height with a ruler and could spot a mailbox violation from 3 blocks away. She'd turned HOA enforcement into an art form, complete with color-coded violation notices and a laminated handbook that residents whispered about in grocery store checkout lines. But this was war! Henderson! She bellowed across the property line, her voice cutting through the mechanical whirring. Turn off that contraption this instant! Marcus Henderson emerged from behind the snow machine wearing cargo shorts, flip-flops, and the biggest grin Karen had ever seen outside of a dentist's office advertisement. At 32, he was everything Karen despised about the younger generation. Casual, irreverent, and apparently immune to the social pressure that kept neighborhoods civilized. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he called cheerfully, adjusting the machine's angle to ensure maximum snow coverage across his St. Augustine grass. "Beautiful day for a blizzard, don't you think?" Karen's perfectly applied makeup began to streak as she marched across her own immaculate lawn, her sensible flats leaving precise divots in the moisture-stressed turf. She'd spent 47 minutes that morning ensuring every blade of grass met the HOA's strict height requirements, exactly 2 3/4 inches, as specified in Section 4.3b of the Community Guidelines. Mr. Henderson, as president of this HOA and your neighbor, I'm ordering you to cease this ridiculous display immediately. You're violating at least 6 different covenants, starting with noise ordinances and ending with... With what? Marcus interrupted, his tone still friendly, but with an edge that made Karen's left eye twitch. Creating a lawn that's absolutely perfect? Isn't that what you've been demanding for the past 8 months? The violation notices. Karen felt her chest tighten as she remembered the 17 citations she'd personally delivered to the Henderson residents since November. Each one meticulously documented, photographed, and filed in her home office that looked like a cross between a legal library and a war room. November 15th. Grass height exceeds community standards by 0.3 inches. December 2nd. Brown patches visible from street view. January 8th. Dandelions present in northwest quadrant. February 14th. Valentine's Day violation. Karen's personal favorite. Grass showing. Signs of winter dormancy inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The list continued through spring and into summer, each notice more detailed and demanding than the last. Karen had been particularly proud of the June 30th citation that included a 16-point inspection checklist and 3 different lawn care service recommendations. Your grass, Karen said slowly, her voice dropping to the dangerous whisper that had made grown contractors weep during architectural review committee meetings, has been a neighborhood eyesore for months. The browning, the uneven growth, the complete disregard for community standards. You mean the grass that's been struggling because of the drought restrictions you voted to implement? Marcus asked, shutting off the snow machine. The sudden silence felt deafening. The same grass that's been dying because the city only allows watering twice a week, but your HOA demands it stay green year-round? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The drought restrictions had been her idea, actually. Water conservation measure that she'd championed at city council meetings while somehow expecting every lawn in Willowbrook to maintain resort-quality perfection. That's... That's completely irrelevant, she stammered. There are drought-resistant varieties, proper fertilization schedules, professional services that cost more than my mortgage payment? Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Karen, I've spent $3,000 this year trying to meet your lawn standards. $3,000 I didn't have, on a yard that's going to die anyway because of these water restrictions. The artificial snow continued to fall, creating a surreal winter landscape that was already drawing curious neighbors from their houses. Karen could see Mrs. Patterson peeking through her blinds, and the Johnsons had actually stepped onto their porch with coffee mugs, watching the spectacle unfold like it was dinner theater. So I figured, Marcus continued, gesturing broadly at his snow-covered lawn, if you want a perfect yard, I'll give you the most perfect yard in Arizona history. Snow never browns, never grows too tall, never gets weeds, and definitely never violates any of your precious HOA covenants. Karen's brain struggled to process the logic. Technically, artificially maintained snow didn't violate any specific landscaping requirements. The HOA handbook was exhaustive, but had apparently never anticipated someone covering their entire front yard in year-round winter precipitation. This is insane, she whispered, watching the snow accumulate into perfect white drifts that would have looked magical if they weren't sitting under a blazing desert sun. Absolutely insane, is it? Marcus pulled out his own clipboard. Apparently, everyone in this neighborhood had one, and began reading from what looked suspiciously like a legal document. Section 4.1a requires maintaining attractive and uniform landscaping consistent with neighborhood standards. Check. Section 4.3b demands grass height maintenance between 2 and 4 inches. Well, snow depth is currently at 3 inches, so check. Section 4.5c prohibits unsightly brown or dying vegetation. Can't get much more alive than freshly fallen snow. Karen felt the familiar sensation of losing control, like watching a perfectly organized filing system get caught in a tornado. For 3 years, she'd maintained order in Willowbrook Estates through sheer force of will and an encyclopedic knowledge of community covenants. Residents fell in line because they understood the consequences, fines, liens, and the social pressure of being the neighborhood pariah. But Marcus Henderson was treating her like a customer service representative he could simply out-logic. "The cost alone," she sputtered, grasping for any argument that might restore sanity to the situation. "The utility bills, the equipment rental, the—" "Cheaper than your recommended lawn service," Marcus interrupted. "I did the math. Industrial? Snow machines run about $40 a day in electricity. Professional landscaping to meet your standards? $120 per visit twice a week. The snow machine pays for itself in 3 months, and I've got a 2-year lease." 2 years? Karen's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. 2 years, Marcus confirmed, patting the machine affectionately. "Meet Blizzard Betty. She's going to be our neighbor for quite a while." The implications hit Karen like an avalanche. 2 years of living next to a winter wonderland in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. 2 years of neighbors gathering to watch the daily snow show. 2 years of explaining to the city council, the HOA board, and her own husband why she couldn't control one simple lawn maintenance issue. 2 years of losing. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Marcus said, restarting the machine with a thunderous roar, "I need to maintain my perfect lawn. Wouldn't want to get a violation notice." Karen stood frozen, literally and figuratively, as artificial snowflakes began settling on her hair, her clipboard, and her carefully planned morning. Around her, the neighborhood was coming alive with curious residents, pointing phones in her direction and already typing what she was certain were social media posts that would spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. She'd faced down city planners, contractors, and unruly homeowners before. She'd won architectural disputes, resolved parking violations, and maintained property values through pure determination and bureaucratic precision. But standing in her driveway, watching snow accumulate in July while her authority melted faster than ice cream in Phoenix, Karen realized she'd finally met her match. The worst part wasn't the snow, or the noise, or even the inevitable social media attention. The worst part was that Marcus Henderson was absolutely, technically, legally right. His artificial winter wonderland didn't violate a single HOA covenant, because Karen herself had written those covenants to be so demanding and specific that they'd created the perfect loophole. As she watched her neighbors emerge from their houses, like spectators at a circus, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: the uncomfortable sensation of being outmaneuvered by someone who'd actually read the fine print. "This isn't over," she muttered, but her words were lost in the sound of the snow machine and the growing murmur of fascinated neighbors. Marcus Henderson just smiled and adjusted the machine's trajectory, sending a fresh cascade of artificial snow directly toward the property line between their yards. The message was clear. If Karen wanted a perfect lawn, she was going to get one, whether she liked it or not. The battle for Willowbrook Estates had officially begun. Karen's husband, Douglas, found her at 11:30 p.m. in their home office, surrounded by legal documents, HOA handbooks, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints of the entire neighborhood. She'd been there since returning from the morning's snow spectacle, emerging only for bathroom breaks, and to accept the 17 phone calls from fellow board members demanding explanations. "Honey," Douglas said gently, setting a cup of chamomile tea next to her elbow, "it's been 14 hours. Maybe it's time to—" "Found it," Karen announced triumphantly, stabbing her finger at a page in the municipal code. Section 15.4c, excessive. Water usage during declared drought emergencies. The snow machine requires continuous water input, which means Henderson is violating city ordinances. Douglas, who'd survived 32 years of marriage by choosing his battles carefully, settled into the chair across from her desk. At 58, he'd learned to recognize the warning signs of his wife's more ambitious campaigns: the scattered papers, the manila folders labeled with military precision, the way she said Henderson like other people said plague, all symptoms of Karen entering what he privately called HOA war mode. "Sweetheart, didn't you read the incident report Marcus filed with the city?" Douglas held up his tablet, displaying an official document. "He's using recycled gray water from his washing machine and shower, filtered through a closed-loop system. Actually increases water conservation by preventing runoff." Karen's pen snapped in half. "Furthermore," Douglas continued, because he'd learned that ripping off Band-Aids quickly caused less overall pain, he's applied for a residential innovation permit under the city's new environmental technology initiative. They're considering his setup as a potential model for sustainable cooling systems in desert climates. The color drained from Karen's face. "Sustainable cooling systems? Reduces ambient temperature by up to 15 degrees in the immediate vicinity. The city council is reportedly fascinated by the potential applications for public spaces and energy conservation." Karen stared at the broken pen in her hand like it had personally betrayed her. In the span of one day, Marcus Henderson had transformed from a neighborhood nuisance into some kind of environmental pioneer, complete with official city backing and what sounded suspiciously like positive media attention. "There has to be something," she whispered. "Noise ordinances, equipment permits, property line violations." "He's got permits for everything," Douglas said quietly, "including a special exemption for equipment noise during standard business hours, which he's actually not using. The machine runs on a timer from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., well within city guidelines." Karen's perfectly organized world tilted another degree toward chaos. She'd built her reputation on being 3 steps ahead of every potential HOA violation, but Marcus had apparently played chess while she was still setting up checkers pieces. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the midnight quiet like an alarm. Karen glanced at the caller ID and immediately regretted every life choice that had led to this moment. "Board meeting," she announced to Douglas. "Emergency session." 45 minutes later, Karen sat at the head of the Willowbrook Estates community center conference table, facing 5 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The community center smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and disappointment, lit by fluorescent bulbs that made everyone look vaguely ill. "So let me understand this correctly," said Bob Martinez, the treasurer, consulting his notes with the weary expression of a man who'd been awakened at midnight to discuss snow machines. "Henderson's artificial lawn technically complies with all HOA covenants, has city permits, uses recycled water, and might actually increase property values due to the novelty factor?" "It's not about compliance," Karen snapped. "It's about community, standards, neighborhood aesthetics, and maintaining the character of Willowbrook Estates. The character of making people spend thousands of dollars they don't have to maintain impossible lawn standards during a drought?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the secretary, who'd never been Karen's biggest fan. "Because honestly, Karen, some of us are starting to think Henderson has a point." The betrayal hit Karen like a physical blow. Jennifer had been her ally for 2 years, supporting every initiative from mailbox color standardization to the controversial seasonal decoration protocols. If she was wavering, the rest of the board couldn't be far behind. "I've had 16 phone calls today," continued Jennifer, "from homeowners saying they're tired of choosing between bankruptcy and violations. The Pattersons are considering selling because they can't afford the lawn maintenance anymore. The Johnsons took out a second mortgage last year partly to cover landscaping costs." "That's not our problem," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Community standards exist for a reason. Property values, neighborhood prestige, maintaining—" "Maintaining what, exactly?" Bob interrupted. "Because according to my research, Willowbrook property values have dropped 3% in the last year, while similar communities with more reasonable HOA requirements have increased by 5%. People are avoiding us because of our reputation." Karen felt the familiar sensation of losing control, but multiplied by a factor that made the morning's snow machine confrontation look like a minor disagreement. She'd spent 3 years building Willowbrook into what she considered a model community, with standards that would make Martha Stewart weep with envy. But sitting in the community center at nearly 1 a.m., facing board members who looked at her like she was the problem rather than the solution, Karen began to understand that her vision of perfection might not be universally shared. "I move to table any action against Henderson pending further review," said Dr. Patricia Chen, the newest board member. "His setup is legal, innovative, and frankly more environmentally responsible than forcing everyone to maintain grass in a desert." "Seconded," said Jennifer immediately. Karen watched her authority evaporate like water on hot asphalt. In the space of 18 hours, she'd gone from undisputed HOA queen to a woman whose own board was considering her the neighborhood villain. "Meeting adjourned," she said quietly, because the alternative was screaming, and Whitmore women did not scream in public. The drive home took 7 minutes, during which Karen passed Henderson's house 3 times. The snow machine was silent for the night, but motion sensor lights illuminated the artificial winter landscape like something from a fairy tale. Even in the darkness, she could see the perfect white coverage, unmarred by brown spots or uneven growth. It was, she was forced to admit, absolutely beautiful. Douglas was asleep when she arrived home, but he'd left another cup of tea on her nightstand along with a note. "Remember that I love you even when the neighborhood doesn't." Karen sat on the edge of their bed, still in her HOA meeting clothes, and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. She'd never thought of herself as unreasonable. Demanding, yes. Particular, certainly. But unreasonable? The evidence was mounting against her. She'd joined the HOA board originally to protect property values after the recession nearly destroyed their investment. Everything she'd done, every rule, every standard, every violation notice, had been motivated by the genuine belief that maintaining excellence would benefit everyone. But looking back at 3 years of increasingly strict regulations, Karen began to wonder if she'd lost sight of the difference between excellence and obsession. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Saw the evening news. Henderson's story went viral. Bar's perfect snow lawn is trending on social media. Thought you should know. Karen's stomach dropped as she opened her laptop and searched the hashtag. Thousands of posts, photos, and videos of Marcus Henderson's snow-covered yard, most accompanied by commentary about genius solutions to HOA tyranny and one man's brilliant response to neighborhood Karen. Neighborhood Karen. The phrase hit her like a slap. She'd become a meme, a symbol of everything people hated about overly controlling homeowners associations. Social media users were sharing photos of her standing in her driveway that morning, measuring tape in hand, looking exactly like the stereotype of an entitled middle-aged woman who calls the police on children selling lemonade. But the worst part wasn't the mockery or the social media attention. The worst part was reading the comments from her own neighbors, people she'd thought she was helping, describing years of stress and financial strain caused by her impossible standards and relentless harassment. Karen closed the laptop and stared out her bedroom window toward Henderson's house. The motion lights had clicked off, leaving the snow-covered yard in darkness, but she could still make out the shape of Blizzard Betty sitting like a monument to her defeat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, media attention, angry neighbors, and the growing realization that she might have spent 3 years being the neighborhood villain while thinking she was the hero. But tonight, sitting in her perfectly organized bedroom in her perfectly maintained house, Karen Whitmore began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about what perfection actually meant. The thought terrified her more than any HOA violation ever could. Outside, a gentle desert breeze rustled the artificial snow, creating a sound like whispered secrets in a winter that would last for 2 years. The war was far from over, but for the first. Karen's morning coffee routine, 7 minutes of precise grinding, water heated to exactly 195 degrees, French press steeped for 4 minutes, was interrupted by the doorbell at 6:23 a.m. Through the peephole, she could see a young woman with a television camera crew, all standing in her driveway with the enthusiasm of people who'd found the story of a lifetime. "Mrs. Whitmore," the reporter called. "I'm Jessica Chen from Channel 12 News. We'd love to talk to you about the snow lawn situation and your perspective on HOA management in modern communities." Karen's first instinct was to hide in her walk-in closet until they left. Her second instinct was to march outside and explain, with charts if necessary, why community standards matter and how Henderson's stunt was undermining 3 years of careful neighborhood development. She chose option 3, brewing a second cup of coffee and calling her sister. "Linda, I need crisis management advice, and I need it now." Linda Patterson, yes, the same Patterson family Karen had been monitoring for mailbox infractions, was a public relations specialist who'd spent 15 years handling corporate disasters. She was also the only person who could tell Karen she was being an idiot without ending up on the HOA violation list. "I saw the news," Linda said without preamble. "Also Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and something called Reddit, where they've created an entire community dedicated to mocking you. We need to talk." 20 minutes later, Linda sat in Karen's kitchen, scrolling through her phone with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. Okay, the good news is that this story has a natural expiration date. Social media attention spans are short, and most people will move on to the next outrage within a week. And the bad news? The bad news is that you've become the face of HOA overreach. There are at least 3 documentary filmmakers trying to contact Henderson for interviews, and someone started a GoFundMe to help other homeowners install their own snow machines. Karen felt her carefully maintained composure crack a little more. A GoFundMe? Raised $12,000 in 18 hours. They're calling it the Perfect Lawn Defense Fund. Linda showed her the screen, which featured a photo of Henderson's snow-covered yard with the caption, "Help homeowners fight back against unreasonable HOA tyranny with creative compliance." The phrase creative compliance made Karen's eye twitch. It sounded like something people said right before they turned community living into complete anarchy. "There's more," Linda continued, because apparently Karen's morning hadn't been sufficiently devastating yet. "The city council wants to interview Henderson about expanding the environmental innovation program. 3 other neighborhoods are considering similar installations. And? The Arizona Republic wants to do a feature story about the evolution of HOA governance in modern suburbs. They specifically want to contrast traditional enforcement approaches with newer community engagement models." Karen translated this in her head. They wanted to use her as the before picture in a cautionary tale about HOA management. The doorbell rang again. Through the window, Karen could see that the news crew had been joined by what appeared to be neighbors, curiosity seekers, and at least one person holding a sign that read, "Snow Justice." "I can't live like this," Karen whispered. "I can't have news crews camping in my driveway and neighbors treating me like some kind of cartoon villain." "Then don't," Linda said simply. "Change the narrative." "What do you mean?" "You've got 2 choices. Option 1, hide in your house until this blows over, which it will, but you'll never recover your authority or credibility. Option 2, get ahead of the story and control the conversation." Karen stared at her sister like she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. "Control what conversation? Henderson outmaneuvered me completely. He's got permits, legal backing, environmental benefits, and public support. I've got a measuring tape and a reputation for being unreasonable. You've also got 3 years of documentation proving you care about this community," Linda pointed out. "Receipts for every improvement you've advocated, photos of property values rising, correspondence with city officials about infrastructure, upgrades. You're not the villain here, Karen. You're just someone who lost perspective." "Lost perspective? When's the last time you walked through the neighborhood and actually talked to people? Not about violations or regulations, but about their lives, their challenges, what they need from their community?" Karen opened her mouth to answer and realized she couldn't. She'd spent so much time monitoring compliance that she'd stopped seeing the people behind the properties. "Henderson's winning because he identified a real problem and found a creative solution," Linda continued. "You can win by acknowledging the problem and proposing better solutions." Outside, the crowd was growing. Karen could see Henderson emerging from his house, clearly ready to hold an impromptu press conference in front of his snow machine. He was dressed casually but deliberately, work clothes that said practical problem solver rather than suburban rebel. "What would you suggest?" Karen asked, hating that she needed advice, but recognizing that pride was what had gotten her into this mess. "Start with the obvious. Admit that some HOA standards need revision. Propose a community meeting to discuss reasonable modifications. Acknowledge Henderson's concerns while maintaining your commitment to neighborhood quality." "That sounds like giving up." "That sounds like leadership," Linda corrected. "Real leadership isn't about winning every battle. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone." Karen watched through the window as Henderson began speaking to the reporters, gesturing toward his snow-covered lawn and then toward her house. She couldn't hear the words, but she could imagine the narrative. Reasonable homeowner driven to creative extremes by unreasonable HOA president. The worst part was that he wasn't wrong. "I spent 3 years trying to create the perfect neighborhood," Karen said quietly. "I honestly believed I was helping people protect their investments." "You probably were helping some people, but you were also hurting others, and you lost track of the balance." Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Douglas. "Emergency HOA board meeting called for this afternoon. Jennifer's requesting your resignation. Thought you should know." The final blow. Her own board, the people she'd worked with for 3 years, were ready to remove her from the position she'd held with such pride. "I need to make a statement," Karen said suddenly. "Before the board meeting, before Henderson controls the entire narrative, I need to get out front of this. Linda smiled for the first time that morning. Now you're thinking like a PR professional. What do you want to say? Karen looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at Henderson's artificial winter wonderland that was somehow more beautiful and practical than anything she'd managed to create with 3 years of regulations. I want to say that I was wrong. Not about caring for the community, but about how to show that care. I want to propose solutions instead of just enforcing problems. That's a good start. What solutions? Karen felt her brain shift into a different gear. The same analytical precision she'd used to write regulations now focused on fixing them. Drought-resistant landscaping standards that actually work in desert climates. Financial assistance programs for homeowners struggling with maintenance costs. Community gardens where people can pool resources. Seasonal decoration allowances that celebrate creativity instead of punishing it. Now you sound like someone I'd vote for, Linda said. Ready to go outside and face the cameras? Karen took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked tired, stressed, and slightly defeated, which was probably appropriate for someone who'd just realized she'd been fighting the wrong battle. For 3 years. One more thing, she said to Linda. What if Henderson doesn't want to cooperate? What if he's enjoying being the neighborhood hero too much to work with me? Then you work around him. But from what I've seen, he seems more interested in solving problems than creating drama. Give him a chance to be part of the solution. Karen opened her front door and stepped into the desert heat, artificial snowflakes immediately settling on her shoulders as the morning breeze carried them across the property line. The crowd turned toward her with the anticipation of people watching a reality TV show finale. Time to find out if she could change the narrative or if she was about to make everything infinitely worse. The camera started rolling, and Karen Whitmore began the most important speech of her HOA career, one that might save her reputation or destroy what was left of her authority. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was fighting for something worth saving. Not her perfect vision of the neighborhood, but the possibility of a community where people could actually live. The snow kept falling, and Karen stepped forward to meet her future, whatever it might hold. The press conference lasted 43 minutes and would later be described by local media as either a stunning display of accountability or too little, too late, depending on which channel you watched. Karen stood in her driveway with Henderson's snow machine providing a soundtrack of environmental innovation and delivered what she would later recognize as the most important speech of her adult life. I want to start by acknowledging that I've made mistakes, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. For 3 years, I've focused so intensely on maintaining property standards that I lost sight of the human cost of those standards. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, neighbors, reporters, curious onlookers, and what appeared to be at least one person live streaming the entire event. Karen could see faces she recognized from violation notices, people who'd probably spent years avoiding eye contact with her at the grocery store. Mr. Henderson's snow lawn is creative, environmentally responsible, and technically compliant with all HOA regulations. More importantly, it's highlighted a fundamental problem with how we've been approaching community management in Willowbrook. Estates. She paused, glancing toward Henderson, who was listening with an expression of cautious skepticism. Smart man. If their positions were reversed, she'd be suspicious too. Effective immediately, I'm proposing a 6-month moratorium on all landscaping violations while we work together to develop new community standards that balance property values with financial reality and environmental responsibility. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen caught sight of Jennifer Walsh, who'd apparently decided to attend despite calling for her resignation, looking surprised by the announcement. Furthermore, I'm requesting that the board establish a community assistance fund to help homeowners transition to drought-resistant landscaping, and I'm personally pledging the first $1,000 to that fund. The pledge hurt. Their savings account wasn't exactly overflowing, But Karen had learned enough about public relations from Linda to understand that gestures mattered more than explanations. Finally, she said, looking directly at Henderson, I'd like to invite Mr. Henderson to join a community planning committee to help develop standards that work for everyone, not just those with unlimited landscaping budgets. Henderson stepped forward, and Karen braced herself for public humiliation. This was the moment he could either graciously accept her olive branch or deliver a devastating one-liner that would define the rest of her neighborhood career. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I appreciate the apology and the invitation, but I think we need more than new standards. We need a completely different approach to community management. Karen's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The moment he destroys me in front of God, the media, and everyone I'll have to see at the mailbox for the next 30 years. What I'm proposing, Henderson continued, is a pilot program where community decisions are made through resident input sessions rather than board mandates, where we start with what people actually need and work backward to regulations, instead of starting with rules and forcing people to comply. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. Karen realized this was Henderson's moment to either accept partnership or claim total victory. If Mrs. Whitmore is serious about change, I'll work with her on that committee, but I want to see action, not just promises, and I want other residents involved in every decision. Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years, respect for someone who'd challenged her authority. Henderson wasn't grandstanding or seeking revenge. He was pushing for actual solutions. Agreed, she said immediately. Community input, sessions, resident involvement, transparent decision-making. Let's do it right this time. The applause was scattered but genuine. Karen caught sight of Mrs. Patterson, Linda's mother-in-law, actually smiling for the first time in recent memory. But the real test came 3 hours later, in the emergency board meeting that had been called to discuss her resignation. The community center felt different at 2 p.m. than it had at midnight. Sunlight streamed through windows that Karen had never noticed before, and the 5 board members looked less like firing squad and more like people who were genuinely concerned about their neighborhood's future. I saw your press conference, Jennifer said without preamble. The Community Assistance Fund is a good start, but we need to talk about the deeper issues. I know, Karen replied, setting down a folder that contained 3 years of violation records. I've been reviewing everything we've done since I became president. We've issued over 400 citations, collected nearly $30,000 in fines, and driven at least 6 families to consider moving. Bob Martinez whistled softly. I didn't realize the numbers were that high. Neither did I until I added them up. We've created a community where people are afraid to plant flowers because they might violate color standards, where families are choosing between groceries and lawn maintenance, where neighbors avoid each other because everyone's worried about being reported. Dr. Chen leaned forward in her chair. So what are you proposing? Complete deregulation? I'm proposing that we start over with community input, Karen said, echoing Henderson's language. Hold listening sessions, find out what people actually want from their HOA, and build standards around those priorities. That could take months, Jennifer pointed out. Good. Maybe if we'd taken months to think about our original standards, we wouldn't be dealing with snow machines and viral videos. The room was quiet for a long moment. Karen could hear the air conditioning cycling on, the distant sound of traffic on the main road, and what might have been Henderson's snow machine starting up for its afternoon shift. There's something else, she continued. I think we need new leadership for this transition. Someone who hasn't spent 3 years being the neighborhood enforcement officer? You're resigning? Bob asked. I'm proposing to step down as president and serve as a regular board member if you'll have me. We need someone who can build consensus, not someone who's known for measuring grass with a ruler. Jennifer and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. Linda had warned Karen that rebuilding trust would take time, but she hadn't anticipated how vulnerable she'd feel asking people to give her a second chance. I'll consider staying on the board, Jennifer said slowly, if we can establish real accountability measures and community oversight. No more unilateral decisions, no more violation sprees, no more treating neighbors like compliance problems. Agreed. And I want Henderson's input on any new leadership structure, added Dr. Chen. If we're really serious about change, we need to include the people who've been most affected by our policies. Karen nodded, realizing that her path back to respectability ran directly through the man whose snow-covered lawn had become the symbol of her failure. The meeting lasted another hour, ending with a tentative agreement to restructure the board, establish community input processes, and, most importantly, publicly acknowledge that Willowbrook's approach to HOA management had been counterproductive. Karen walked home through the neighborhood she'd tried so hard to perfect, seeing it with different eyes. The Johnsons' lawn had brown patches, but their flower garden was beautiful. The Patterson house needed paint, but their vegetable garden was the most productive in the subdivision. The Chen family had installed solar panels that didn't match. The approved color scheme but probably saved them hundreds on electricity bills. For 3 years she'd seen problems. Now she was beginning to see people. Henderson was in his front yard when she passed, adjusting the snow machine's angle to ensure even coverage across his lawn. The artificial winter landscape looked even more surreal in the afternoon heat, but Karen had to admit it was also strangely beautiful. "Mr. Henderson," she called, stopping at the property line they'd argued across that morning. "Do you have a minute?" He looked up, wariness flickering across his face. "If this is about noise complaints or equipment violations..." "It's not. I wanted to thank you." That stopped him cold. "Thank me?" For forcing me to see what I'd become, for finding a creative solution instead of just complaining, for being willing to work with me instead of destroying me when you had every opportunity. Henderson studied her face, apparently looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Karen understood the caution. She'd have felt the same way. "I meant what I said about the Community Planning Committee," she continued, "and about changing how we do things. But I need you to know that this isn't a political strategy or damage control. I genuinely believe we can build something better than what we've had." "What about your perfect neighborhood?" he asked. "All those standards and regulations you spent 3 years implementing?" Karen looked around at the houses surrounding them, at the desert landscape that had never been meant to support English-style lawns, at the community she'd tried to force into an impossible mold. "Maybe perfect isn't the point," she said. "Maybe livable is better than perfect." Henderson turned off the snow machine, and for the first time since the morning, Karen experienced true quiet in her neighborhood. "All right, Mrs. Whitmore, let's see if we can build something livable." As she walked the final block home, Karen felt lighter than she had in months. The news crews were gone, the crisis was manageable, and she had a plan that didn't involve. 6 weeks later, Karen found herself sitting cross-legged on Henderson's artificial snow, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that would have horrified her former self, holding a clipboard that contained community suggestions instead of violation notices. The transformation felt surreal, like discovering she'd been living in a house of mirrors and finally stepping outside. The first community input session had drawn 12 people. The second brought 23. Today's gathering, officially, dubbed the Willowbrook Reimagining Workshop, had attracted nearly 60 residents, including families Karen had barely spoken to in 3 years of living 4 houses apart. "Okay," Henderson called out, standing on his porch with a megaphone that definitely wasn't HOA approved, but somehow seemed perfectly reasonable now. "Let's hear from the landscape working group first. Maria Santos, a single mother who'd received 6 violation notices for her struggling lawn, stood up with a confidence Karen had never seen from her before. "We've identified 15 drought-resistant plant varieties that are both beautiful and practical for our climate. We're proposing to replace the grass requirements with native landscaping standards that actually work in Arizona. The crowd murmured approval. Karen made notes, remembering how she'd once dismissed xerophytic gardening as an excuse for lazy maintenance. Now, she was beginning to understand the difference between maintenance and stewardship. The cost analysis shows an initial investment of about $800 per household, Maria continued, but savings of over $2,000 annually in water and maintenance expenses. Plus, we're proposing a community bulk purchasing program to bring the upfront costs down. What about property values? Asked Bob Martinez, still thinking like a treasurer. Actually higher with native landscaping, replied Dr. Chen, consulting her tablet. I've been researching comparable communities. Sustainable landscaping is becoming a selling point, not a liability. Karen felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of losing control, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Excitement. These people weren't dismantling community standards, they were building better ones. Next up, Henderson announced, the Community Spaces Committee. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be architectural drawings. We're proposing to convert the unused common area behind the mailbox cluster into a community, garden and children's play space. Shared resources, shared responsibility, shared benefits. The plans were ambitious. Raised beds for vegetables, a small playground, covered seating areas, and what looked like a tool library where residents could borrow equipment instead of everyone owning individual lawnmowers and hedge trimmers. Who's going to maintain all this? Asked Mrs. Patterson, Linda's mother-in-law, who'd spent years complying with regulations she clearly hated. Everyone, Jennifer replied. Rotating schedule, shared work days, seasonal celebrations. The idea is to make community involvement rewarding instead of punitive. Karen studied the drawings, recognizing the careful thought and genuine care that had gone into every detail. This was what community planning looked like when it started with people's needs instead of abstract standards. Mrs. Whitmore, Henderson called out, want to share the update on the assistance fund? Karen stood up, brushing artificial snow off. Her jeans, something she'd never imagined doing 2 months ago. The fund is at $4,700 thanks to contributions from residents and local businesses who heard about our transition. We've approved 3 grants so far, and we're establishing a sliding scale fee structure for community improvements based on household income. She paused, looking around at faces that had once avoided her in the grocery store, and now looked at her with something approaching respect. I also want to announce that the board has voted to refund all violation fines collected in the past year, about $12,000 total, to be redistributed through the assistance fund and community improvement projects. The applause was spontaneous and sustained. Karen felt tears prick her eyes, remembering how desperately she'd once craved approval and how hollow it had felt when it came through fear instead of respect. Finally, she continued, we're officially changing our name from the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association to the Willowbrook Community Collective. Same legal structure, completely different approach. Henderson grinned. I like the sound of that. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from seasonal decoration guidelines, now called celebration parameters, and designed to encourage creativity, to parking protocols, now focused on neighbor communication rather than citation. Karen found herself taking notes on ideas she'd never considered, solutions to problems she hadn't realized existed. As people began to pack up their folding chairs and head home, Henderson approached her with an expression she'd learned to recognize as serious conversation incoming. Can we talk for a minute? He asked. They walked to the edge of his property, where the artificial snow met her still perfect lawn. The contrast was stark. His creative, practical, constantly evolving winter wonderland versus her chemically maintained, regulation-compliant grass that looked increasingly ridiculous in the desert heat. I've been thinking about the snow machine, Henderson said, about whether it's still serving its purpose. Karen felt an unexpected pang of loss. You're thinking of removing it? Maybe. The point was never to have a snow lawn forever. The point was to prove that there were better ways to think about community standards. And now? Now we're actually building better standards. The question is whether Blizzard Betty has outlived her usefulness or whether she's become part of what makes Willowbrook special. Karen looked at the snow machine, remembering her fury and frustration from that first morning. It had become a symbol of everything she'd thought was wrong with the neighborhood, and then everything that was wrong with her approach to fixing it. What do the neighbors think? Mixed opinions. Some want it to stay as a reminder of how we got here. Others think it's become a distraction from the real changes we're making. A few kids have asked if they can have snow parties. Karen laughed, imagining children playing in artificial snow in the middle of the Arizona summer. Snow parties? Yeah. Marcus Jr. from 3 houses down wants to have his birthday party here next month. Says it would be the coolest party in Phoenix, literally. The image was absurd and wonderful. Kids building snowmen in 100-degree heat, parents serving hot chocolate while wearing shorts, the neighborhood gathering around something joyful, instead of controversial. I think, Karen said slowly, that maybe the snow machine should stay. Not as a symbol of rebellion or compliance, but as a reminder that creative solutions can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most beautiful things come from thinking differently about problems. Henderson nodded. Besides, property values are actually up 3% since the snow lawn went viral. Turns out people want to live in a neighborhood known for innovation and community problem solving. Property values were always a red herring, Karen admitted. I convinced myself that perfect lawns would protect our investments, but what really protects property values is having a community where people want to live. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the artificial snow drift across the property, line between their yards. Karen realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about violations or regulations or maintaining control. She was thinking about what it might be like to plant a native garden in her front yard, to host the next community meeting in her backyard, to be known as someone who brought neighbors together instead of driving them apart. Henderson, she said, would you be interested in helping me redesign my landscaping? I'm thinking it's time for some changes. He grinned. I thought you'd never ask. As they walked toward her house to discuss drought-resistant plants and community, gathering spaces, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about her neighborhood's future. The perfect lawn had been her obsession for 3 years. But maybe, she thought, looking at the creative chaos of Henderson's snow-covered yard, perfection wasn't nearly as interesting as possibility. Behind them, Blizzard Betty continued her gentle snow production, transforming a corner of the Arizona desert into something magical, practical, and completely unexpected. Just like the community they were building together, one creative solution at a time. 3 months after the Great Snow Lawn Revolution, as local media had dubbed it, Karen stood in what used to be her perfect front yard, now a construction zone of native plants, decomposed granite pathways, and what Henderson cheerfully called organized chaos. The transformation was messy, expensive, and absolutely nothing like the manicured perfection she'd once demanded from everyone else. It was also the most satisfying project of her adult life. The Palo Verde tree goes there, she called to Marcus Jr., Henderson's 8-year-old son, who'd become her unofficial landscaping consultant. And remember, we're creating microclimates, not just planting random desert plants. Marcus Jr. nodded seriously, making notes in a composition book that looked suspiciously like Karen's old violation clipboards. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd gone from training kids to follow rules to training them to think creatively about environmental solutions. Mrs. Whitmore, called Maria Santos from across the street, where she was supervising the installation of the community's first native plant demonstration garden, the Channel 12 crew is here for the follow-up story. Karen's stomach fluttered. 3 months of positive community coverage had helped repair her reputation, but she still felt nervous about media attention. The difference now was that the story wasn't about her failures. It was about the community's successes. Jessica Chen, the reporter who'd first covered the Snow Lawn story, approached with the same camera crew but a completely different energy. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're here to document the progress of what people are calling the Willowbrook miracle. Can you walk us through what's changed?" "Everything," Karen said simply, gesturing around the neighborhood. "But the biggest change isn't what you can see, it's how we make decisions." She led the crew on a tour that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. The community garden was thriving, with tomatoes, peppers, and herbs growing in shared beds maintained by rotating teams of neighbors. The children's play area featured equipment built by residents using the community tool library. 3 houses had installed solar panels using the bulk purchasing program, and 2 families had converted their front yards to native landscapes that required minimal water and looked like professional botanical displays. The most remarkable change, Jessica noted for her story, is in community participation. HOA meetings that once drew 5 reluctant board members now regularly attract 40 to 50 residents who actually want to be there. "It turns out," Karen explained to the camera, "that people are eager to invest in their community when they have a voice in how it's managed. We went from a compliance-based system to a collaboration-based system, and everything improved." They paused at Henderson's house, where Blizzard Betty continued her daily snow production. The artificial winter landscape had become a beloved neighborhood landmark, complete with a small plaque that read, "Sometimes the most perfect solution is the one nobody expected." "The snow lawn stays?" Jessica asked Henderson, who was adjusting the machine's settings with the precision of someone who'd mastered his craft. "The snow lawn stays," he confirmed. "But now it's part of a bigger ecosystem. Kids have birthday parties here, couples take engagement photos, and the cooling effect helps with our community garden microclimate. It's not about proving a point anymore, it's about contributing to something larger." Karen watched the interview, remembering her rage and frustration from that first morning. The woman who'd stood in her driveway measuring grass with a ruler felt like a different person entirely, someone she could observe with compassion but no longer identified with. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jessica turned to her, "you've gone from being criticized as an overly strict HOA president to being featured in a Harvard Business School case study on community leadership transformation. What would you tell other HOA boards struggling with similar issues?" Karen had been asked this question dozens of times over the past month by reporters, academics, and other community leaders. Her answer had evolved, but the core remained the same. "Start with humility," she said. "I spent 3 years believing I knew what was best for everyone, without actually asking what people needed. Real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating systems where the right answers can emerge from the community itself." She paused, looking around at neighbors who'd become collaborators, at children playing in spaces they'd helped design, at gardens that fed both bodies and souls. "Also be willing to be wrong, spectacularly wrong if necessary. My snow lawn moment was humiliating, but it was also liberating. Once I accepted that my approach wasn't working, I could finally start learning from people who had better ideas." The interview wrapped up with shots of the evening community meeting, now held outdoors in the new amphitheater space, carved out of what used to be unused common area. 63 people attended, including children who played quietly while adults discussed everything from upcoming seasonal celebrations to a proposed electric vehicle charging station. Karen no longer ran these meetings, that honor now rotated monthly among interested residents, but she contributed ideas and helped coordinate follow-through. Leadership, she'd learned, didn't have to mean control. As people packed up their folding chairs and headed home, Henderson approached her with an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Letter from the city council. They want to know if Willowbrook would be interested in piloting a new community-governed HOA model for other neighborhoods." Karen opened the letter, reading through official language. that essentially asked if they'd be willing to share their transformation process with struggling communities across the region. They're offering funding for documentation, training materials, and consultant support, Henderson continued. Basically, they want to turn our accidental experiment into an intentional program. What do you think? I think, Henderson said, grinning, that a year ago you would have said yes because it would make you look important. Now you're probably thinking about whether it would actually help people. He was absolutely right. Karen's first instinct was to consider the community impact, not the personal recognition. I'm thinking we should propose it at next week's meeting, she said. If people are interested in helping other neighborhoods avoid the mistakes we made, I'm willing to share our story, the embarrassing parts and all. All of it? Especially the embarrassing parts. That's where the real learning happens. As they walked toward their respective houses, Karen noticed that the property line between their yards had become meaningless. Her native plants grew next to his snow-covered lawn in a seamless blend of practical innovation and creative expression. "Henderson," she called as he reached his front door. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing potential in me when everyone else just saw a problem. For working with me instead of just working around me." He smiled. "Thank you for being willing to change." Not everyone would have had the courage to admit they were wrong and actually do something about it. Karen walked the final steps to her front door, past her decomposed granite pathway, through her xerophytic garden that bloomed in ways her old lawn never could. Douglas was waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea and the expression of a man who'd watched his wife transform from neighborhood enforcer to community builder. "Good meeting?" he asked. "Great meeting. The city wants to use our model to help other HOAs. And I'm excited about the possibility. A year ago, I thought I had all the answers. Now I know the right questions to ask." They sat in comfortable silence, watching artificial snow drift across their desert neighborhood, listening to the sounds of children playing and neighbors talking, and a community that had learned to thrive instead of merely comply. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Saw the news story. Mom says the vegetable garden tomatoes are the best she's ever grown. You did good, sis." She had done good, but not in the way she'd originally planned. The perfect neighborhood of her imagination, with its measured grass and color-coordinated mailboxes and elimination of any visual disorder, had given way to something messier, more collaborative, and infinitely more alive. 6 months ago, she'd been the neighborhood Karen, a symbol of everything people hated about overly controlling communities. Now she was Karen the collaborator, the reformed HOA president, the woman who'd learned that the best way to protect property values was to create a place where people actually wanted to build their lives. The transformation wasn't complete. It might never be complete, which was possibly the point. Communities like gardens required constant attention, adjustment, and care. But unlike her old approach of rigid maintenance, this new model felt sustainable, joyful even. As the evening settled over Willowbrook, bringing relief from the desert heat, Karen felt something she'd never experienced during her years as HOA president: genuine contentment with her community and her role in it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to get things wrong and learn from the mistakes. But tonight, sitting in her reimagined front yard, listening to her neighbors living their lives without fear of violation notices, Karen Whitmore finally understood what it meant to be home. The snow machine hummed quietly in the distance, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected solutions create the most extraordinary results. And sometimes, if you're